So this is just a little fan-made project, mostly me rambling and musing about life is strange. Nothing too serious, but it does mean a lot to me. If you feel like listening, or even sharing your thoughts back, I'd really appreciate it. To begin with, I chose to highlight this portion of Jung's book, Synchronicity, because I felt it offers meaningful context for understanding the supernatural forces at work in Life is Strange. In particular, the idea that intense emotional states, especially within these young women, can resonate with or even shape external reality. And so, I feel like it gives better context for the game's portrayal of Max's time powers. And also Rachel Amber's brush with the supernatural and synchronistic wildfire. Synchronicity is the idea that sometimes things happen in your life that feel meaningfully connected, even though there's no clear causal domino effect where one event directly causes the other. And yet they somehow seem connected, and even dependent on each other, though the connection feels mysterious or supernatural. Jung's reference to Avicenna's notion of the soul influencing the world through emotional excess provides a psychological and symbolic framework. This helps illuminate the deeper forces behind the game's surreal events, rather than being purely random or solely magical. These phenomena may be expressions of powerful inner experiences, manifesting outward, much like Jung's theory suggests. In other words, strange events in the outer world are reflections of the inner world, mirroring its metaphysical significance. Now here is that excerpt from the book, Synchronicity. I discovered an instructive account of magic in Avicenna's Liber Sextus Naturalium, which says that a certain power to alter things indwells in the human soul and subordinates the other things to her, particularly when she is swept into a great excess of love or hate or the like. When therefore the soul falls into a great excess of any passion, it can be proved by experiment that such excess binds things and alters them in the way it wants. And for a long time I did not believe it. But after I had read books of the same kind on science and magic, I found that the emotionality of the human soul is the chief cause of all these things. Whether because, on account of her great emotion, she alters her bodily substance, or because, on account of her dignity, the other lower things are subject to her. Everything she does with that aim in view possesses motive power and efficacy for what the soul desires. This text shows clearly that synchronistic or magical happenings are regarded as being dependent on affects. Affects refer to strong emotional responses or feeling-toned experiences. They are the raw, often intense emotional states that accompany thoughts, memories, or psychic events. This psychic expression of an inner reality originates in the unconscious and therefore belongs to those thoughts which are independent of us, which, in the opinion of Arnold Geulincx, are prompted by the divine and do not spring from our own thinking. Goethe thinks of synchronistic events in the same magical way. Thus, he says in his conversations with Eckermann, we all have certain electric and magnetic powers within us, and ourselves exercise an attractive and repelling force. Thus concludes that section of text from the book that I wanted to share with you. I'm sorry if it sounds like I was just yapping. I just think this stuff is interesting. In the book Synchronicity, Carl Jung discusses the Rhine experiments, led by J.B. Rhine at Duke University in the 1930s. These tested for extrasensory perception. The implication across these studies is profound. They point to a possible interaction between mind and matter that isn't causal in the traditional sense, but instead connected through meaningfulness, just as Jung's idea of synchronicity proposes. If thought, emotion, or intention can subtly shape random events, then it supports a very interesting idea. An idea regarding inner psychic reality and outer physical reality. It implies that they may be connected on a deeper level than science has yet fully explained. Some test subjects regularly outperformed randomness, hinting that psychic energy might influence outcomes beyond known physical laws. Jung found all this compelling, as it all highlights those odd but meaningful causal connections, which he defined as a synchronicity, where inner states like thought or emotion align meaningfully with outer events, without a direct cause. Later studies built on this by using random number generators. Participants tried to influence machines which produced random results on their own accord, but because of a test subject's affects, small but consistent anomalies appeared. It suggested focused thought or emotion might subtly manipulate outcomes, even without physical contact. Arcadia Bay symbolizes the old, familiar model of the world, embodying emotional stasis for Max, who spent her formative childhood years there. It is a place frozen in nostalgia. The game reinforces this through Max's diary entries and inner monologues, where she often reflects on how everything feels frozen in time, how nothing really changes in Arcadia Bay. The town is filled with remnants of her childhood, her old room, the lighthouse, and her rekindled relationship with Chloe. These elements symbolize a psychic space, not yet restructured by adult experience. Even the school environment, Blackwell Academy, is filled with immature social dynamics, cliques, bullying, and high-hoped dreams. It is a place before personal confrontation with love, loss, and irreversible change. So if this is what Arcadia Bay represents, what does it mean for Max to come back? After all, when she returned to Arcadia Bay, she was not allowed to live as just a student, or just a photographer, or just a friend. Circumstances called her to become more than just this. She obtained her power, and thus could no longer content herself with simply being part of the scenery. Although the more I think about it, I suspect it was her intention, before arriving, to be even less than this. Less than the scenery. Like an ethereal photographer who isn't even there, set in self-constraint, only there to observe out of a photojournalistic ethic of non-intervention. A principle held by some photojournalists who believe their primary duty is to witness and record events truthfully, even in crisis, rather than intervene. Those who take this stance see themselves as visual historians, believing that their purpose is to inform the world, not alter the scene. In this way, they forsake living in the moment, preferring instead to preserve it. They may feel that helping one person risks failing to show the full truth, or that the image itself may invoke more empathy, even if such empathy must come from outside themselves, even if they must suffocate whatever sympathy wells up within them in the moment. And perhaps Max started out with that belief. However, the awakening of Max's powers represents the desire to be more than this. In a fuller conscious sense, Max hoped for passivity. But some autonomous phenomenon, outside Max's will and conscious intention, intervened, perhaps in a manner analogous to the subconscious. And now she becomes someone who must carry the weight of her own choices. She hopes to matter. But how can she be substantial if she fails to cast a shadow? A butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil, and a tornado occurs in Texas, as the saying goes. Like the snake that infiltrated Eden, consequences have come into her life. After the fall, chaos entered the world and goodness could no longer propagate itself. Now there must be sacrifice. Now the good must be suffered for. Soon thereafter, exile will follow, and an impassable barrier will be placed on the garden, so that it may not be returned to. It's now a world of chaos and chance, where, as the saying goes, the variable flutter of a butterfly's wings can cascade into a roiling storm. Max wrestles with all this to the backdrop of Arcadia Bay, a pale Eden, seemingly unchangeable and familiar, where she once felt safe. A place to be exiled from, once higher consciousness is obtained. I believe the storm represents the chaos of growth and commitment. It is a barrier that cannot be crossed trivially. As the story progresses, the storm looms in tandem with Max's growing emotional involvement and the moral weight of her decisions. The more she hopes to be more than an idle observer, the closer it draws. Indeed, even a small thing can cast a large shadow. It looms in spirit outside of town, circling like the inevitability of transformation, of the self breaking through illusion, complacency, and non-existence. And in that world, as Nietzsche wrote, to live is to suffer. To survive is to find meaning in the suffering. Choosing to save Chloe and let the town be destroyed reflects this. You step through the storm, let go of old ways, and choose individuation. You escape with the girl you love, fully accepting the inevitability of chaos, fully embracing the consequences of being. In contrast, choosing to sacrifice Chloe, symbolically, marks a return to Arcadia Bay. It is an act of preservation rather than transformation. It is an attempt to undo damage, to restore order, but at the cost of the very emotional force that pushed Max toward growth in the first place. Creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of those who subjected it. They hope it might be set free from the bondage of degeneration, like the divine. Since the fall from grace, the whole of creation has been groaning in pain over the burden of calling form into being. Romans 8:22. Consciousness is pain. The return to Arcadia Bay at the beginning, and perhaps at the end, is not what it seems. It's a lie to think you'll simply be allowed. Even if the game does not show as much after the credits, trying to preserve the past is a lie. After all, is it not true that trying to remedy pain through manipulation often deepens it? That much is shown thus far, hasn't it? Before the storm. How much better would things fare after it? Think of Kate. If Max misuses time, trying to perfect every moment rather than engaging authentically, Kate can die, despite all good intentions. The answer is to be there, genuinely. Trying to optimize human connection like a puzzle can reduce empathy. You think too much and feel too little. That's the problem. Authenticity and vulnerability become buried by fear. Is that the fate of things in a world where the metaphysical has a real-world counterpart? The death of individuation. The lifelong process of becoming one's true, whole self by integrating the conscious and unconscious. Think about all that has happened within the main character's inner life. Have they not been accompanied by real-world occurrences? But I'll postpone this notion for later. How can it be that erasing the girl you love is the right answer? If you could take the events of the game in a strictly literal sense, perhaps there is a case to be made that sacrificing Chloe is the true and utilitarian choice. But to interpret the events in the game wholly literally is an illusion. As I will expand upon later, there is a strong case for a double exposure effect of sorts, where metaphysical realities are given real-world expression. Someone who has not passed through the inferno of their passions has never overcome them. Would you skirt the growing pains of individuation, so that no barrier exists between you and infantilism, so you have some excuse not to become ousted into the real world, so you might instead find a place in the pale Eden, content in unlife? Were we not forewarned thus far before the end? Were there no consequences for such things too during the game? Though after the credits, after sacrificing Chloe, I suppose the exact causality of such a thing is not explored. Consider how Max uses a photo to travel far back in time to prevent Jefferson's crimes. This rewriting of events leads her into a dangerous dream state and breaks the timeline again, resulting in the nightmare sequence. This is because reality and the metaphysical run in parallel. If some aspect of inner life is cheated and fractured, so shall it be for reality itself. The more Max tries to undo trauma by surgically removing moments from the past, the more unstable her inner world becomes. Avoidance of consequence leads to psychic fragmentation. The deeper Max digs into the past to fix her regrets, the more she becomes lost in a nightmare of her own mind. The only way forward is through mindfulness, presence, and acceptance. The meeting of two personalities is like a chemical reaction. Chloe is the catalyst for growing up, for realizing the transformative aspect of loving another, and for putting up with all the troubles an actual person brings, and all the trouble that actual love brings. From their first reunion in the bathroom, Chloe shatters Max's emotional distance. She demands presence, feeling, and reaction. Chloe's pain, anger, and recklessness force Max to feel, not just observe. Through their deepening bond, Max confronts the intensity of connection, jealousy, attraction, shared trauma, guilt, and desire. Through their deepening bond, Max confronts the intensity of connection, jealousy, attraction, shared trauma, guilt, and desire. The junkyard scenes, the close calls, the kiss, and the final goodbye all point toward Chloe as a psychic agent of transformation. She is not a safe, idealized friend. She is real, imperfect, and emotionally volatile. And that is precisely what makes her a symbol of real love and real growth. In life, you may very well fall deeply, deeply in love with someone who is deeply, deeply flawed. There is no such thing as holding out for someone perfect, because there is no one who is perfect. Chloe is a pain in the ass, but that's real. She's just as lost as anybody else. Avoiding her is avoiding the storm, because avoiding her is avoiding the growing pains that depart you from what is familiar and safe. This is reflected in how many of Max's most defining emotional choices revolve around Chloe. To stay emotionally distant, to erase yourself from the moment, or to sacrifice her at the end is, symbolically, a refusal of change and an attempted retreat into the past. But to stay with Chloe, despite the world collapsing, is to embrace the storm, to embrace the inferno as the price of becoming. It is the pain beheld by creation for the price of rendering existence into being. The Great Fire and Before the Storm appears to be a phenomenon set in motion, at least in part, by supernatural forces. And in this way, the psychological life of Rachel Amber became expressed in reality. Synchronicity is the experience of two or more events that are meaningfully related but not causally connected. It's when an inner psychological state is reflected in an external event, not by cause and effect, but by symbolic resonance. Emotional outbursts may be seen as a sign of immaturity and tend to be framed as the wrong way to conduct oneself. And perhaps that may be true more often than not. But there's one exception which must be stated. In Jungian psychology, complexes are autonomous clusters of psychic energy, usually organized around emotionally charged themes. A complex forms when something, often emotionally intense or unresolved, becomes split off from the conscious ego, yet still retains psychic energy and can influence thought, feeling, and behavior from below the surface. Healing a complex requires bringing such psychic material into conscious awareness. You must name and witness it. Allow the ego to engage with such energy, lest it gain a life of its own and slip beneath your awareness, where it may act in shadowed, autonomous ways. Thus, reducing its unconscious grip, transforming it into a part of the whole self. For you see, complexes yearn to become expressed. What has entered your awareness may not leave, only become ignored, prohibited from running their course. Sometimes, ignored content wishes to live, wishes to become expressed, if not through conscious life, then beneath it. Conscious expression of inner life, especially in emotionally meaningful or symbolic ways, can weaken, integrate, or transform these complexes. And so, as I've stated before, especially in regard to Rachel Amber and the Great Fire, there is something exceptional to be said about emotional outbursts, so often dismissed as childish or immature. Giving expression to psychic life can be very disruptive and volatile, yet it may very well be the right thing to do in order to become psychically whole and achieve individuation. Though it may require the right type of friend or lover to understand this, the average person who stands outside looking in simply will not know. It goes without saying that there is a wrong way of going about this. You may become more sensitive to turmoil if this is practiced incorrectly, but with maturity and wisdom, it becomes the right path. The Great Fire represents this volatility, and yes, as you might have guessed, it is the pain beheld by creation for the price of rendering existence into being. In Plato's allegory of the cave, the revelation of the real world provokes a negative reaction. You must sacrifice all you thought you knew. The true light of the world is experienced as abhorrent at first, for it hurts the senses and agitates conscious experience. But that is the challenge. One must become climatized to the real world, or live in a pale imitation of it. One part of the game that carries a lot of symbolic weight is the part where Max seeks to salve the emotional heartache of loss within Chloe's heart by preventing the death of her father. Because this game tells a story of parallel lives, where the external circumstances often closely match psychological inner life. The exact arrangement of circumstances means something deeper than their surface. Consider it a double exposure of sorts. Events are not just literal, but metaphysical, both elements running in parallel. The salvation of her father brings about an alternate reality where Chloe has become severely disabled in a car accident. We see how her parents adopt an extreme form of self-sacrifice that exceeds what is psychologically sustainable and developmentally healthy. In the normal timeline, unlike the alternate one where Max saves Chloe's father, Chloe loses him during a formative stage of childhood. And in the wake of his death, she clings tightly to his memory, not only as a source of love, but as a symbol of elevated and unwavering devotion. Her father, in Chloe's eyes, is someone who centers her emotional needs completely, with no expectation in return, as seen in her dreams. He becomes, psychologically, the embodiment of a parent who gives all, who never asserts his own pain or limitations, and who simply exists to comfort and affirm. In her dreams, he is seen gravely injured, fresh out of a horrific car accident, yet his primary concern is Chloe. He never winces from the pain. It is wholly out of his mind. And in that way, he is apparently devoid of personal concern, externally facing outside himself completely, towards the inner life of his daughter. This idealization of the caregiver is understandable, especially in the face of early loss. In fact, psychological development in childhood depends on a caregiver who can, at times, suspend their own needs to attune to the child's distress. This kind of self-arrested caregiving, where the adult temporarily puts aside their inner world to reflect and regulate the child's experience, is essential in forming a secure attachment. But Chloe's longing goes beyond this. She doesn't just miss her father. She yearns to return to a state where that level of attention is permanently available, where someone would always put their own life on hold to make her feel safe and seen. To desire this is understandable, but it does reflect a stalled developmental process, and it's not age-appropriate once enough time has passed. But the growing pains are understandable. Chloe's mother, Joyce, offers a more realistic relationship. She clearly cares deeply, but unlike the ghost of William, she is alive, complex, and emotionally occupied. She has her own grief, her own needs, her own pain. She cannot and does not suspend her entire self to focus solely on Chloe. From Chloe's perspective, this might feel like abandonment, but in reality, it reflects a healthier, more sustainable kind of love, one that acknowledges the mutual burdens of life, rather than disappearing into the child's emotional world. This contrast becomes even clearer in the alternate timeline, where Chloe survives but is paralyzed. Her parents are still together, and they now direct unrelenting attention and care toward her. So much devotion is poured onto Chloe. It borders on self-erasure. William and Joyce show Chloe constant affection and support, but they have essentially surrendered their own lives in order to sustain hers. Their home becomes a kind of shrine to Chloe's needs. When a baby is young and helpless, this type of devotion is fair. But with age, this type of devotion is all-consuming. And in this timeline, Chloe thinks it unfair. Despite finally receiving the attentive, protective environment she may have longed for in the first timeline, Chloe sees the quiet cruelty of it, that her parents no longer live their own lives, that their devotion comes at a personal toll too great to be fair. This version of Chloe is arrested not only physically, but in certain aspects, also emotionally. She cannot explore, rebel, or individualize. She is surrounded by love, and while it is fit for an infant, such a state is incompatible with a growing young woman. In line with the theme I pointed out earlier, she necessarily had to be reduced to such a state in reality, if it was the case that she successfully hung on to her father. For this is what it means, metaphysically, to hang on to her father, and what he represents. In this scenario, there is great sacrifice, some conscious elevation, but no individuation. And so it is without great conscious uplifting. And it is that last part that I suspect is the greatest problem. No individuation. In this timeline, she is keenly aware of how much her parents sacrificed to care for her. And though she is grateful, she is also disturbed by the imbalance. She recognizes the injustice of love that costs someone else everything. When we get to the storm, it's hard to discern what's right. Is the answer for Chloe's self-erasure and the death of individuation a total and complete self-sacrifice? But then wasn't that just established as the wrong answer? And is it not also true that the more Max tries to undo trauma by surgically removing moments from the past, the more unstable things become? So how can that be the answer? Has it also not been established that presence is better than manipulation? I know that remedying the storm by allowing Chloe to die at an earlier point in time is framed as the antithesis of manipulation, a choice to observe rather than interfere. But isn't it still true that Max is trying to manipulate an outcome with her powers? Sometimes a butterfly flaps its wings and causes a hurricane on the other side of the world. That, too, is part of the natural course of events. And perhaps the challenge here is that we're going to have to learn to accept that as well. This is why the alternate timeline, where Chloe's father remains alive, is so haunting. It doesn't just show us a different fate. It shows us the psychological consequence of never letting go of childhood models of understanding, with metaphysical realities given comparable real-world expression. And in the same vein, where the metaphysical is mirrored by a real-world counterpart, it can be said that letting go of the past also means letting go of Arcadia Bay in the real world. The emotional release is not just symbolic, it has tangible, irreversible consequences. What is surrendered in spirit must also be surrendered in form. What Chloe truly needs is the ability to feel loved and to love in return without collapsing into neediness or resentment, in spite of such great turmoil within her. It's as if canon and fate demands this of her. The truth is that the individuation of both Max and Chloe are not just canonical, but also fated to be. Like a tree whose branches reach up to heaven, its roots must reach down to hell. The narrative is perhaps a bit Lovecraftian in this way. In Lovecraftian terms, ignorance is safety. Knowledge, especially of the metaphysical, is highly volatile to people's ordinary life. The horror of great destruction and great conscious elevation are necessarily paired together in the story, I believe. The true path is to have them both, and accept that sometimes a butterfly flapping its wings is a course of nature to accept, as difficult as that may be. To have one without the other fractured reality and led to worse outcomes, at least prior to the storm, and presumably, in the sacrifice Chloe ending, distortion is bound to occur. I believe it's there despite not seeing it. For as I said, that was the lesson imparted thus far. The game thrives on the illusion of choice. So then, the most meaningful thing made apparent in the game isn't the ability to Photoshop the perfect outcome. but rather your very own reflection on events. Metacognition. A person who has not passed through the inferno of their passions has never overcome them. And they must pass through, experience them fully, and survive their intensity, survive the storm, in order to transform them into wisdom, control, or integration. A person who has not passed through the inferno of their passions has never overcome them, and they must pass through, experience them fully, and survive their intensity, survive the storm, in order to transform them into wisdom, control, and integration. They must become substantial. It's their destiny. In Attachment and Psychotherapy by David J. Wallen, it is pointed out that people with early attachment injuries can still grow, especially through emotionally corrective experiences in adulthood. These may come in the form of romantic partnerships, where a new kind of emotional pattern can be formed. Relationships in adulthood, particularly those that are emotionally safe, attuned, and mutual, can serve as earned secure attachments. These relationships don't erase past trauma, but they can reshape internal working models of self. The salvation of mankind lies in love and being in love. This quote is by Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychiatrist, Holocaust survivor, and founder of logotherapy, which centers on the search for meaning as life's primary drive. He's best known for Man's Search for Meaning, a wonderful book. Max, then, is not just a friend returning from the past. She is an opportunity for Chloe to take the next step in her emotional evolution. Their relationship, if nurtured, becomes a place where Chloe can feel chosen, safe, and cared for, but also challenged to care in return. This is not a recreation of her father's love, nor a replacement for her mother's limits. It is a new kind of attachment, one based on reciprocity, presence, and growth. Chloe Price's emotionality is raw, reactive, and often overwhelming. For others and for herself, she lashes out, clings, withdraws, and resists help, not out of malice, but from a deep fear of being abandoned or unseen. Like many who carry early wounds, she lives in a defensive state where the lower brain takes over and reaction replaces reflection. Vulnerability feels unsafe, so she pushes others away before they can leave. But choosing to be vulnerable, to stay open in the midst of pain, is a form of strength, one she hasn't yet learned to trust. What Chloe needs most is to see that she is worth the trouble, not tolerated, not managed, but worth loving even when she's at her worst. Her mother understands this. She offers love with boundaries. She shows up, but doesn't erase herself to keep peace. This teaches Chloe that someone can stay with her without being controlled by her. Max, too, is in a position to show Chloe that her messiness doesn't make her unlovable, to be difficult and worthwhile. That's how Chloe begins to believe in her own value. True strength, in this sense, lies in being able to feel fully without losing oneself. If Chloe can feel worthwhile enough to stop flailing and start reflecting, her attachment style can shift. Her individuation wouldn't mean silencing her emotions. It would mean recognizing they're hers to hold, to metabolize, and that she is worth loving anyhow. Loving Max and being loved by her allows Chloe to emerge from the arrested state of longing and resentment, and to step into the vulnerable, courageous work of growing up emotionally. The right answer, if you ask me, is to matter. To accept that chaos and randomness entered the world after the fall from grace, and that a butterfly may now flap its wings and very well cause a storm. It is to accept that after the fall, goodness cannot propagate itself, and if left to its own devices, shall disappear from the world. It is to realize that, at the same time, the substantiation of manipulation is the antithesis of vulnerability, mindfulness, and genuine presence. To matter is to realize that to be substantial, one must cast a shadow. It is to break free from the bondage of degeneration in a world trending toward entropy, to avoid fading into inaction, infantilism, and ethereal nothingness. It is to accept that consciousness is pain, and that creation will groan with the aches of rendering being into form, and to choose the way of becoming anyhow. To not consume the one you love, to fully confront, experience, and endure intense and often destructive emotions, rather than repressing or avoiding them, integrating them fully into the self, to find salvation through love, and in love. Thank you for listening thus far. There is another related idea I wish to present next. Before diving into this idea more fully, I'd like to lay out the basic framework for the interpretation I'm proposing. That the player in Life is Strange can be understood not as an external agent, but as a figure operating within the protagonist's internal world. As a complex in the Jungian sense. Chloe Price isn't your usual polished screen hero. She stands apart from those incorruptible main characters in old war movies and epics. Chloe's rebellious outsider vibe really highlights this difference. She feels more authentic, more like an actual person. Think about your own family, friends, or partners. Do they fit neatly into ideal molds? Like Chloe, they're probably sometimes selfish, anxious, impatient, fearful, prideful, and morally short-sighted. Just like anybody you love, or shall come to love, they can be a pain in the ass. Real people often act poorly without fully grasping the impact of their actions. However, we continue to include these imperfect individuals in our lives, accepting and loving them as complete entities with both good and bad aspects. Chloe may evoke archetypal elements that intrigue the audience, but she embodies a multi-dimensional human experience. An archetype is a psychic phenomenon that exists within the subconscious, representing universal, deep-rooted patterns and primordial psychic energies, which exist within all humans. Archetypes themselves are not observable directly. Instead, they manifest through symbols, images, characters, or reoccurring themes in stories. When a person observes a representation of an archetypal phenomenon, the result is that they feel its impact emotionally. A symbol acts as a tangible, real-world expression of an archetype, which is intangible. All archetypes are ethereal and cannot be observed directly, but real-world mediums act as sort of stand-ins for them, if that makes sense. Archetypes communicate through resonation, so when a person encounters something meaningful in the external world, like a character, theme, or symbol in a story, it triggers a profound emotional response. This is because the archetype within them recognizes and responds to the corresponding external symbol, essentially speaking to the person through feelings rather than words. when we find something that is deeply profound to us. We don't choose to feel that way, right? And it should be noted that, in this way, they operate outside of our conscious will. So, as I said before, Chloe is very evocative. Her character deeply resonates with many people, and they find her to be sensational, even if her attitude, egoism, and self-centeredness could use some work. In the games, players control Chloe and Max. These characters maintain their own distinct personalities and act independently, in a manner that is, often enough, wholly out of the player's control. This isn't a true role-playing game. Your character isn't a soulless and silent protagonist, who essentially has no thoughts and feelings, an empty vessel the player projects an inner life into. In Life is Strange, characters feel truly alive, with their own thoughts and emotions that the player is largely meant to observe and navigate, more so than control. This illustrates that the gameplay is not about the player dominating an empty vessel's actions. Rather, it's about engaging with another person's ego, which has its own motivations and desires. The ego helps individuals maintain a positive self-image by paying special attention to favorable traits while suppressing the spotlight on negative ones. A person needs to maintain a sense of themselves that is positive, for the sake of their emotional and mental well-being. This is essential for emotional and mental health, but it can also distort reality. Rather than actually being a good person, however, it is too often the case that the ego instead warps perceptions by highlighting the good and suppressing the bad in an individual's actions. When these negative traits are pointed out by friends or family, it might cause discomfort, leading to defensive behavior or even hostility. This discomfort is known as cognitive dissonance, a psychological state that arises when there is a discrepancy between someone's beliefs and reality. It is not so well known that features which are hidden from you, regarding yourself, are counterintuitively, readily apparent to others. This might seem odd. After all, who would know you better than yourself? Have you ever had a recording of your own voice and disliked what you heard? That's not what I actually sound like, right? You might ask. But it is. It is, though. Behold, details about yourself that are readily apparent to others but hidden from you. And in this way, Chloe is self-centered and ignorantly unperceptive of certain realities. And so, in this way, she isn't all that different from me or you. Such flaws are to be expected from any person, to be honest. What can you do then, other than be patient and understanding with her? Because she's worthwhile. In Jungian psychology, a complex is a core pattern of emotions, memories, perceptions, and wishes within the unconscious, which are organized around common themes. Complexes can influence behavior and thoughts significantly, often without the person's conscious awareness. They can manifest in various ways, depending on the emotional charge and the experiences that contribute to them. Complexes can behave as if they were autonomous entities within the psyche, capable of influencing or interfering with the intentions of the ego, aka the part of the psyche that we consciously identify with and control. In essence, complexes act like secondary or partial psychic entities, each possessing their own distinct mental life, operating beneath our awareness. This is the role I believe the players take up when they play Life is Strange. Bold assumption, I know. But like I said, you don't dominate Max and Chloe. The choices you make only reflect actions they were already capable and willing to enact. It reveals rather than overrides who they are. You are not Max and Chloe. You are a ghost in the shell. You weigh upon them, but not as a fully realized personality. They are not consciously aware of you. You do not dominate them fully. So therefore, I think you essentially take the role of a complex. On a related but tangential matter, a daemon is a concept that originated in ancient Greek culture and philosophy, referring to a guiding spirit or an inner voice that directs a person towards their fate or calling. I'm almost tempted to say the player fills the role of a daemon, because that word sounds cool. But alas, this isn't accurate. Daemons are consciously detected and interacted with. Complexes are not. Some good examples in media where the audience takes the role of a daemon in the story are Mr. Robot and House of Cards. Here, the audience appears to be a consciously acknowledged presence who weighs upon the character's ego. There's one scene from the movie Revolver, where a previously less than conscious psychic force within the protagonist, called Mr. Gold, becomes consciously perceived. The protagonist then comes to understand that this psychic force has a will of its own, and begins to see just how deeply it has influenced his behavior all along. The daemon lashes out, pushing its guidance forcefully upon him, pleading to be recognized as a friend rather than a saboteur. In Fight Club, the nameless protagonist, credited only as the narrator, develops a dissociated identity, Tyler Durden, a manifestation of his repressed desires. This entity doesn't remain the flip side of the protagonist. As time goes on, he begins to play the role of a proper daemon. He becomes consciously visible to the narrator, no longer operating solely in the unconscious, and his presence now weighs upon waking life in real time. In myth and in Jungian analysis, daemons personify deep inner drives that must be integrated and not obeyed blindly. Integration is a conscious relationship. You may let the daemon inform you, inspire you, and challenge you, but you don't abdicate your life to it. Jung warns that archetypal forces, like daemons, are so powerful they can take over the ego's decision-making if left unchecked. They are parts of the psyche that feel autonomous, as if they have their own will. This is because they arise from layers of the mind beyond conscious control. Even if it is the case that they have entered conscious awareness, they are outside your will. I personally would have liked it if the players got upgraded to daemon status in the Life is Strange sequels. Doing more good than harm, of course. It would be cool if there was a sequel, maybe with Chloe as the protagonist, where the player evolves into a daemon. That would be interesting, wouldn't it? Complicated, surely. But it's a cool idea, I think. The term has been explored in depth by psychologists interested in the deeper aspects of personality and potential, such as James Hillman, who was influenced by Jungian psychology. It is described as an innate urge or drive that guides an individual toward their unique destiny or life path, sometimes likened to the Roman concept of a genius, a guiding spirit or natural inclination that shapes one's character and choices. It's interesting how the Romans used that word, isn't it? Now it just means smart or something. Anyway, that was just a massive tangent. As I've mentioned before, I see the role of the player in Life is Strange not as that of a daemon, but as a complex. A less than conscious and semi-autonomous psychic structure that can override or disrupt some of the ego's direction. You are but one aspect within the psyche of Max and Chloe, which wrestles with the other aspects of their being. You have influence over them, which is substantial, but you do not fully dominate them, so they remain their own person. The games take place in the minds of the protagonists, Chloe and Max within their respective games, who are undergoing a significant life transition. You play as a representation of Chloe or Max's potential and inner wisdom. A complex typically forms when a powerful emotional experience leaves behind unresolved psychic material. These unresolved experiences cluster around a particular theme, usually a theme that's too uncomfortable to face and explore. So they split off into semi-autonomous structures. I know this is kind of an abrupt way to wrap things up. Maybe not the most graceful transition, but this felt like the right place to end. I just felt that this song, Build Your Cages by Pulse Ultra, taps into that longing and the tension between sacrifice and identity. Zoe Vizza, the vocalist, once said it's about refusing to give up your dreams, even when the world tells you it's safer not to chase them. So I'll leave you with a line that just feels fitting here. Sacrifice everything you know, you love. The dream entices you to give yourself away. You miss the things you hated long ago, but dreams are seldom what they seem.